All right. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for um, being here tonight. My name is Sarah Gould. I am the Training and Program Manager at Connors Klein Foundation, and I am here to present and prevent, to present our suicide prevention for the community presentation. So we'll go ahead and get started. Um, right off the bat, I just sort of want to make sure that everyone is kind of checking in with yourself throughout this presentation. I know particularly because when we're doing this virtually, or even if you're watching the recording, um, you're most likely alone and kind of doing this on your own. So I just want to make sure that you're checking in with yourself throughout. If you feel like, you need to take a break, kind of get a sip of water, whatever, take a deep breath, whatever you need to do, feel free to do that. You can just shut your camera right off. You can actually leave the meeting if you really feel like you need to. Additionally, if really this is being recorded, so even if we get partway through and you're like, tonight's not the night for me to be interacting with this information, feel free to just go ahead and leave, and just make sure that you reach out to either Becky or Deborah just to let them know that you're safe and that you're okay. But other than that, you can watch the rest of it at a later date, so that's actually a good thing. And then I just wanted to remind everyone about the one of the resources that we have in New Hampshire, and it's actually nationwide, the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. So this is a number that you can either call or text if you, or actually anyone that you're with or anyone that you know is in any sort of mental health crisis. So just make sure that that I just want to make sure that you have that in your toolbox if you need it, particularly when you're working with youth in your lives. Sometimes we just don't really know where to go with a certain situation, and you can always dial 980 and they can always help you triage and kind of talk you through next steps, even if it's not you that's in the crisis. So, all right. So just a little bit about us. So you'll see our mission there. And really, bottom line is we're here to provide no cost suicide prevention education to adults, mostly school staff. And we also train volunteers, which all of you, most of you are, and then other agencies staff. I did a similar training for the leadership staff of Big Brothers and Big Sisters in the fall, I think. I can't actually remember exactly when it was, but it all goes by so fast. And so that is one of the things that we do, one of the ways in which we provide education. We also help to fund student suicide prevention curriculum in the classrooms in schools. So we partner with a particular program. It's an evidence-based program, and we fund that for schools, and then we train the familiar adults who will be facilitating it with students. We train them on the specific program and how to facilitate that. All right. So I skipped ahead, but just quickly, our story, the beginnings of our organization was in 2011. Our namesake Connor Ball died by suicide. So he was 14. He was a freshman at Exeter High School, and when he died, his family really decided that they didn't want anyone else to have to struggle the way that they are struggling. And so, particularly his mom decided that she really needed to do something. She started by implementing or helping to implement suicide prevention education in SAU 16 and in the Exeter schools, and it has grown from there. So these are our numbers for 2023. So 76 New Hampshire schools either received a training from us or as part of the SOS program, or we fund their SOS program. And then additionally, we facilitated 73 other trainings. Those included 133 schools and then 15 agencies. And we trained almost 5,000 adults throughout the course of 2023. So I'll just briefly tell you about myself. So I have been working with children and families for my whole career. prior to joining Connor's Climb, my most recent experience was as a school counselor. So I spent 10 years as a school counselor. And I really wanted to be more involved in prevention. That's kind of the why I'm here. So 2 years ago, I decided to hop back into the nonprofit world and took on this role, which is really more focused on prevention, which is what I'm really excited about. And then those two photos are not of me. Those are my two biggest reasons why I do this work. So Connor is 14 and Emily is 10. You can probably tell who is who there. Connor is in the ski team attire there, and Emily is in the cheerleading uniform. And so one of the reasons why I chose these particular photos is that when we talk about protective factors, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, one of the biggest protective factors is really a connection to community, a connection to our passions, and really kind of finding our passions. So I just like to one, brag on my kids a little bit, two, just, remind everyone that it's really important to kind of find something that you're passionate about, regardless of whatever it is. All right. So we're going to kind of get into the content here. And so these suicide myths and facts, really, I find more and more that these are not like brand new. This is not brand new information for people that I'm training, which is amazing. That means we're talking about it more and more, and I love that. However, I do always just want to kind of set the playing field a little bit at the beginning of each training, just so we're kind of all working with the same information. So I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but if you have questions, if something doesn't make sense, it's something you've not heard of before and you're like, oh, wait, I thought that was true. Please stop me or put a comment in the comments and we can stop and talk about it more. But like I said, I do find that most of the time folks are sort of at least familiar with most of this information. All right, so our first myth, asking someone if they are thinking about suicide increases the likelihood that they will attempt suicide. We know that this isn't true. If someone comes into a conversation with you and they have not been thinking about suicide, if you ask, they're not going to magically think that it's a solution to their problem. And the opposite is true. The opposite is also true, though. When you do ask and they are thinking about it, generally it's met with relief. Generally, youth report that they feel comfort and like a sense of belonging that someone actually cared enough to really ask the question. People who talk about suicide won't really do it. We also know that that's not true. There are many, many different warning signs. We call them warning signs, kind of things to look out for. And they're not all verbal, but there are definitely verbal cues and verbal warning signs are definitely common. And we want to make sure that whenever we hear any youth talking about suicide and kind of talking about wanting to kill themselves, even if it's sort of in a joking manner, that we take it seriously enough that we have like kind of that next step conversation with them. So it's easy to tell when a teen is depressed because they cry all the time and withdraw from friends and family. We also know that this isn't true. Those are some of the warning signs, absolutely. However, particularly with younger children, and then so younger school age children, like elementary school age children, and then younger adolescents, and then also males in particular, you may see more agitation, more frustration. You may even see them like an increase in uptick in negative behaviors in the classroom or something like that. Or in their meetings with you or whatever, or in the activities that you're doing with them. So we just need to make sure that we're looking out for everything. All right, so depression is the only mental health problem associated with suicide. Depression and suicide are very highly associated with each other. And when we're talking about warning signs, you will hear me say something like a sign that someone may be struggling with depression and or suicidal ideation. And that's because they share many warning signs, they share many risk factors, and they're highly associated with each other. But really any mental health, just a reminder that any mental health diagnosis really does increase someone's risk of suicide or suicidal ideation. Depression and suicidal behavior are relatively rare in young people. We also know that that's not true. Um, particularly and anecdotally, I think particularly through the COVID pandemic, instances of youth struggling and being diagnosed with mental health difficulties has been on the rise. And we know that right now in New Hampshire, that suicide is in the top 4 leading causes of death. Does anyone know, anyone have any idea which number it is? 1 to 4? Or want to guess? And just hold up if you have your camera on, you hold up your, oh, I just did it. Yeah, someone in the chat, someone said 4. So it's actually number 2. So it's number 2 right behind unintentional injury. Unintentional injury is very broad. So it includes things like drowning, bike accidents, ski accidents, car accidents, some overdoses. So when I give people that statistic, it's actually every time I say it, it just is reiterated to me that it's pretty staggering that suicide, which is a pretty narrow category, it has to be some pretty specific criteria there, that's second only to this broad category of unintentional injury. So just kind of food for thought. And that is, so when we talk about adolescents or youth and young adults in this context, it's ages 10 to 24. But suicide also is in the top 10 for youth ages 5 to 9. And I think it varies between like 7th and 8th. I think right now it's 8th. So that's still a pretty, for that age group, that's still a pretty high percentage. So this is the last, so this is just kind of a couple statistic slides. I don't have a whole bunch of statistic slides, but just a couple. So this, I just wanted to point out this, this is a fairly new resource that's come out. New Hampshire has a New Hampshire Suicide Prevention Council that is part of the Department of Health and Human Services through the state. And every year they produce and publish a suicide prevention annual report. And this year they actually took everything that was in that huge annual report, not everything, the highlights of what was in that annual report and kind of put it into a 1-pager. So when I do training in person, I bring kind of these 1-pagers with me and let people take them. So if anyone's interested in kind of having one in their possession, please feel free to let me know. So there's a ton of statistics on here. This is 2-sided. I just pulled out a few though that sort of relate to kind of, that kind of relate to what we're talking about today. So in New Hampshire in 2021, 229 individuals died by suicide. So it's like 4 to 5 a week. We already talked about it being the second leading cause of death. When you compare suicides to homicides in New Hampshire, for every 1 homicide, there are 12 suicides. And then when we're talking specifically about youth, 9.8% of all high school students attempted suicide in 2021, that's a 40% increase over 2019. That's according to the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which is done every 10 years. So that's why we have those 2 dates. And then 44.2% of all New Hampshire students felt sad or hopeless at some time in the 2 weeks prior to filling out the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. So just this is my last statistic slide. So when we talk about suicide in generally we think about suicide deaths, right? So in 2021, according to the CDC, 48,000 people died by suicide. And this is in the country. This isn't just, obviously, there was 229 of those who were in New Hampshire, but about 48,000 across the country. And so when we compare that to, I mean, 1 is too many, right? But when we compare that to the population of the United States, it's kind of a relatively low number. What we like to remember, though, is that it's not just those 48,000 deaths that we're really kind of targeting when we're talking about suicide prevention. So in addition to those deaths, 1.2 million people attempted suicide. 3.5 million people made a plan to attempt suicide, and then 12.3 million people seriously thought about it. So when you add all that up, it's more like 16.5 million, which is a significant number in comparison to the population of the country. And we also know that these numbers are probably underreported because it's all self-report. So, all right. And then this is just this graph just shows the ways in which people die by suicide. This is across the country, but this same breakdown is true in New Hampshire. So you can see far and away, firearms are the #1 way in which people die by suicide. And we think that that's because firearms are more deadly than some of these other means. For example, we know that among adolescent females, we know that poisoning is the #1 way in which they attempt suicide, but it's not as deadly as firearms. So that's why there are fewer deaths. So if there is a silver lining, the silver lining there would be that, you know, if that's the way in which they're attempting most often, we can intervene because they have a better chance of survival with that attempt. We can intervene and hopefully prevent a future suicide attempt. All right. So
Real quick, sorry to
go ahead.
interrupt.
Yeah, feel free.
Becky had just sent us a message that she got kicked off the Zoom, so she was just wondering if she could come back in, I
Get
think.
back in. She absolutely can. Give me 1 second.
Thank you.
Now I gotta find I'm gonna stop. I think I have to stop sharing. All right, now. I don't know if I can, uh-oh. I can't figure out how to do it. I'm gonna stop the share. There we go. Here she is. Okay. Wait till she's back. You're back.
I love technology. Yes.
Awesome.
I
That's
don't know
awesome.
what happened. Yeah.
I don't know what happened.
I'm glad it worked out though.
Yeah, thank you thank you for interrupting.
Yes.
All right, I'm gonna share my screen again. Let's see. All right. All right, so we were talking about sort of the why behind suicide attempts in youth. And the bottom line is we don't really know. We do know though that it is a kind of a complex mix of many different factors, some of which may be some of the ones that are kind of depicted here. And we know that these are not all of the factors that go into it. These are some of the ones that we might see more often in youth. We're going to talk a little bit more detail about some of them in a second. And so it's just important to remember that it's never one single factor, that generally it's a complex mix, and that it's complicated, right? One thing that might be a factor for one youth may not be for a different youth. So it's really the more that we know what's going on with our youth, the better, for sure. All right. So generally, when we talk about these factors, we divide them into 3 different categories. So risk factors, warning signs, and precipitating events. So risk factors are just what it says. So it's those things that are sort of inherently part of someone's either personality or environment that increase their risk for suicidal ideation. A warning sign are those things that we maybe see and hear from the youth in our lives that make us think that maybe they're struggling with either depression or suicidal ideation. And then precipitating events are events that may happen and if someone is already thinking about suicide or someone already has some risk factors, one single event may cause them to move from kind of thinking about it to actually attempting suicide. We know that one event is, we can never say that one specific event caused a suicide, but we do know that it specific events do play into the complex mix of factors, if that makes sense. All right, so we're gonna look at some examples of all of these. All right, so I'm gonna read you this list. But this is some of the more common risk factors that we find it that we see in youth that increase someone's risk of suicide. There's just a couple. Let me so I just wanted to just quickly touch on a couple. So LGBTQIA plus identity. Just a reminder here, those those asterisks are there, just to remind us that it's not that being part of that community inherently increases a youth's risk of suicide. It's that particular group of youth is discriminated against at a much higher level than the general population. So we think, and the research shows us so far, that it's the discrimination that is sort of the factor that increases the risk. And that's why it's just important to just have safe spaces for LGBTQ plus youth, right? I mean, it's important to have safe spaces for all youth, but particularly that particular community of youth. And then, just the limited access to physical or behavioral health care. I just like to always just kind of point that one out. Access to physical health care really can reduce risk of suicidal ideation, suicide attempts. We know that particularly with younger youth, sometimes it's easier to talk about the physical symptoms that may actually be indicative of some mental health concern. So when they have a good or a healthy relationship with a physical, or a healthy regular relationship with a physical healthcare provider, that can be really helpful for sort of early identification and early intervention. Do all of the other ones on there make sense to everyone? Does anyone have any questions about any of those? Kind of what you would expect. Okay. So just another reminder, the exposure to stigma. Just one really simple, not easy, but simple change we can make is really just thinking about the language that we use. And when we talk about someone who has died by suicide or someone who has attempted suicide, really just thinking about being intentional about using neutral language, I think is just really important. So, committed suicide sometimes brings up some negative connotations, where something like died by suicide is more neutral. It doesn't really connote like a crime or something like that. Let's see. All right. So precipitating events, I'll give you some examples. I know that you all have can probably think of many, many more that may show up in the youth that you work with. But these are just some of the things that that we have heard from youth that may kind of be that sort of that precipitating event, that big event that kind of makes kind of straw that broke the camel's back kind of thing. And just a reminder that all of these events, some youth will just let them roll off their back, and some youth are going to be really affected by them. So the more that we can really know what's important to a youth and which things, when something happens, whether or not we think that that's really going to affect the youth in a big way is really important. All right, and then warning signs. Again, not an exhaustive list, just some of the ones that we may see more often. Just a couple I want to point out. Changes in mood that are not typical. Just a reminder here that this could really go either way. So it could be that a youth who has been engaged, happy, whatever, all of a sudden is not, or over a gradual period of time, all of a sudden is not. And that is a warning sign for sure that they might be struggling. And it also can go the other way. So when a youth has been sort of withdrawn, depressed, despondent, whatever word you want to use, withdrawn, And there's a change, and it's sort of a quick change, almost to like a euphoric state. That's really sort of a clue that we want to pay attention to. It could mean, it doesn't always, it could mean though that they have thought about suicide and that they have made a plan and they may be close to enacting their plan. We do know that in general, suicide is seen as a solution to a problem. And we know in our lives, when we feel like we have a solution to something, you know, usually that's met with relief and happiness and almost euphoria. It's just kind of that something to look out for. And everything else, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. Anyone have any questions about that list? Anything that doesn't really make sense, or anything you want to add to it? Anything that you've seen in the youth that you work with or that are in your personal lives? No? Right. So you notice that bullying was on both the risk factor. It's actually it was on the risk factor slide. I'm not sure if it was on the precipitating event slide, but it certainly should have been or could have been. And then it sometimes is on sometimes is a warning sign too, anyone who's engaging in bullying behavior. Um, and just some a little bit more information around that. We know that most students who are involved in bullying don't become suicidal. But what we do know is that bullying and suicidal behavior share many risk factors, and bullying can exacerbate some of the risk factors that we know to be risk factors for suicidal behavior, including the ones that are listed there. Both the perpetrator and the target are both at an elevated risk for suicide or for suicidal behavior. And bully victims, so those kids that both engage in bullying behavior and are bullied themselves or have been doing either, are the ones that are at the highest risk for suicidal behavior. So just kind of keep an extra eye out for that particular category of youth. So alcohol use, obviously any alcohol use with youth, you're going to get your antenna up a little bit and kind of maybe be a little concerned about it. Excuse me. There are two specific alcohol-related behaviors, though, that we are very highly associated with suicidal behavior. So these are the ones that we would kind of pay even more attention to. So drinking while down. So kind of if someone is already depressed and we know that they're drinking heavily, that is something that's highly associated with suicidal behavior. And then heavy episodic drinking. So sort of what we refer to as binge drinking. Right. Non-suicidal self-injury is any self-injury that is not suicidal in nature. So a lot of times we term this cutting. We talk about, we might talk about it and use that language, cutting, but it really is any sort of self-injurious behavior. So sometimes youth pull their hair out. Sometimes youth, use a rubber band on their wrist and really, that really is a soothing. And what we know is that it typically non-suicidal self-injury is a coping skill. It's a coping mechanism for whatever's going on. And it's an unhealthy one, right? We know that that injuring yourself is not a healthy way to work through something. So if we're able to intervene and kind of get someone some healthier coping skills, hopefully we'll be able to prevent that injurious behavior from escalating to the point where they see no other solution other than suicide. So, all right. And then these are just some statistics to back up what I said about the discrimination. This is from the Trevor Project, their 2022 survey. So you'll see just down at the bottom there, I'll let you look at the rest, but down at the bottom there, when we take out the discrimination, so among LGBTQ plus youth that have been discriminated against, almost 1 in 5 attempt suicide. And then when we take out the discrimination, it's more like 7%, which is very similar to the general population of youth. So just kind of some numbers to back up what I said about the discrimination. All right, so those are kind of some of the things to look out for. Some of the things that we know increase youth's risk. So, you're working with a youth and you notice, that they have some risk factors. A lot of the youth that you are probably working with big brothers, big sisters have at least one risk factor. Most youth have at least one risk factor, right? Um, and then you notice some warning signs, you notice some things, a little off with them or whatever. You notice they maybe are losing a bunch of weight, they're skipping meals, or they're not as engaged as they used to be, that kind of stuff. And then maybe something happens that might be a precipitating event for them. So then what are you going to do? And so if you've been to any suicide prevention training in the past, you know that they all have some sort of acronym. This is no different. So we use the acronym that our student program uses, and that's ACT. So it's acknowledge, care, and tell. So the A is for acknowledge. Oh, the A is for acknowledge. So you're going to, start a conversation with the youth, depending on your relationship. Acknowledge that you're seeing signs and be a little bit specific about it, right? Sarah, I noticed that you've been really down when I've seen you lately. Like, is everything okay? Or I've noticed that haven't been coming to our events as often. Is everything okay? I'm worried about you. Um, and then the C is for care. So let the youth know that you care about them and that you can help them get help, right? And that you can at least be a listening ear. And then the T is to tell. So when the SOS program works through this with students, the T is a trusted adult, and literally anyone could be a trusted adult. So you may have youth coming to you saying that they're worried about themselves or that they're worried about someone else. So for adults that are not mental health clinicians, the T is teleprofessional, right? So any of the professionals that are sort of in your orbit. So, if you have access to the youth's pediatrician, or if you have a relationship with the mental health staff at the youth school, you might want to call them. I actually had a friend call me the other day saying that, her son had woken her up in the night and said that, it said that one of his friends was telling him that he wanted to die. And so the other thing you might do is call a parent, right? So let the parents know. And depending on your policy, if you're big brother, big sister, the organization, you may have to tell the parent anyway. You know, you may want to call 911. If you're not sure if the youth is safe, 911 may be something that you might need to do. If the mental health emergency is to a point where it may be a physical health emergency where they may be injured or die, you want to make sure that you're calling 911. That's really important. And then just a reminder about the asking. So if you notice that, a youth's displaying some of these warning signs, you're significantly worried about them, you start a conversation and you're not feeling better about, their answers are not making you feel reassured. You may think that maybe you should just ask, right? You should just ask the question. And it's okay. It's okay to ask as long as you know what to do when and if they say that they are thinking about it. And what you would do is all those things that we just talked about. You would the T, right? You would tell a professional. You may end up calling 988 with the youth. There's any number of things that you could do. But the bottom line is you don't want to be the only one to have that information. So if you do ask this question and a youth tells you that they are thinking about suicide, you don't want to be the only one that has the information. So just making sure that there's another professional or a parent or a guardian. So there are a couple different ways to ask. Some people like to just be really direct. Have you thought about killing yourself? Have you had thoughts about suicide? And then some folks are a little more indirect with it. And sometimes I recommend the more indirect with younger kids. So do you wish you could go to sleep and not wake up? Do you wish you were dead? Those kinds of things. And then just a reminder that if you are concerned to the point that you feel like you should ask this question, but you don't really feel comfortable, you're not really sure what you would do if they said yes, find someone who can. So you can skip over the asking the question part and just go right to the tell the professional part if that's something that you feel you need to do. All right. So if a youth comes to you and they're worried about another youth, I think that happens a lot. I think our youth are much better at talking about this stuff than we are sometimes. So really just open listening, being engaged, really listening to what they have to say. Tell them, making sure that you're reassuring them that they did the right thing. You may need to contact, like I said before, you may need to contact parents directly. You can contact the school again. And then again, if you're unsure about the child's immediate safety, you're definitely going to call 911. A time when you might be concerned about immediate safety is, so-and-so's been texting me. He's been saying that he wants to die. And now he's not responding to my messages, something like that. That really would be something where I personally would be concerned enough that I might call 911 just to kind of do a wellness check. If I tried the parents first and they didn't have eyes on the kid. All right. So, yep. So those are just some, just kind of repeating what I've already said. And just remember that 988 is always there. 988's just a really good resource, I think, because they're going to help you triage and they're going to kind of give you some choices for next steps. So I think that that's really a great resource. So another way, so if it's not a crisis situation, if you're not necessarily worried about a youth, one of the ways that we can help with suicide prevention and is just talking about mental health, just kind of normalizing the conversation and having those conversations. So if something ever does seem off, or if a youth is sort of feeling off, they know that you're okay to talk about it, right? So just kind of having some of these preventative conversations. And that's hard because we don't talk the same way about mental health as we do about physical health. And sometimes, I think youth are getting better and better and better at this, but sometimes they just don't want to talk about it. But here are just a couple tips for that. Asking open-ended questions. It's really easy to ask yes or no questions, and then you're not going to get a lot of information. Letting the youth steer the conversation. Maybe they don't want to talk about mental health right now and they want to talk about something else. And you don't, it's just remembering that that's not always, if they're not ready, they're not ready. Don't rush to solve their problems. Kind of maybe try to solve whatever's going on together, right? And then again, if they don't want to talk about it, make sure that they know you're around. So I get it. You don't want to talk about it right now. That's okay. Just if you need something, I'm here. I'm here for you. That type of thing. And then so another thing that we can do in our prevention efforts is bolster protective factors. So protective factors are basically just the opposite of risk factors. So these are just some examples. Again, not an exhaustive list. There are plenty of others. However, I just want to focus on that healthy relationship for a second. I just heard a statistic. One healthy adult relationship reduces a youth's risk of attempting suicide by 40%. So 40%, that's really huge. So just being that person in a youth's life, which all of you are already doing with the work that you do and the volunteering that you do, but this is just sort of a validation that what you're doing is really important work. Let's see. The only other one I wanted to point out is the cultural, moral, or religious objection to suicide. We know that youth that have those objections aren't necessarily less likely to struggle with their mental health, but they are less likely to see suicide as a possible solution. So it does really serve as a protective factor. Nope, I don't know why we don't want to go. So just some tips here. You don't need to be an expert. if you are not a mental health professional, you don't need to be a mental health professional to have these conversations. These are just conversations. It's okay to be human. It's okay to be uncomfortable. You're probably going to be uncomfortable having these conversations with youth. And the more that you think about it and the more that you start noticing things, the more of these conversations you're probably going to feel obligated or feel want to have, I guess, want to have. If you know that, particularly in your role with Big Brothers Big Sisters, if you know that you are gonna maybe have a difficult conversation with a youth, talk to someone before and after. Find your support person, um, whoever that is, and talk to them before and after. Obviously, if it's not within the organization, keeping it confidential. And then just, I've already said this a bunch of times, but it can't be said enough. If you're worried about a kid and worried about their mental health and about their intentions around suicide, you can't keep it a secret. You need to make sure that you're not the only adult that knows. Make sure another adult knows for sure. All right. So all of those protective factors, we can play a role in kind of building up those protective factors. So just encouraging connection with you, with other adults, with their peers, encouraging them to try new things, encouraging them to kind of find their passion. All of that is so important. And then just letting them know that you're there. Like I said, building that healthy relationship is one of the biggest things that we can all do to prevent suicidal ideation, suicidal behavior. And then building coping skills, right? So these are just some coping skills, some of the more common ones. There are plenty. And coping skills are just those things that help us work through whatever it is going on in the moment. And we know research does show that when someone is suicidal, sometimes all it takes is 90 seconds to change their mind, right? So having things like some of these coping skills in their back pocket and being able to pull it out, their metaphorical back pocket, and pull it out and use it when they're feeling like that they're feeling hopeless or like kind of at the end of their rope, might just give them that space that they need to kind of make another decision. So the more that we can talk about coping skills with youth, the way that I really phrase this with youth is when you're stressed out, what helps you, right? And if a youth is like, I have no idea, there's nothing that I can do to help, then that's probably something you're going to work on, right? Or if they say things like, I pull out my hair, or I drink a six pack, or whatever, or I smoke pot, whatever, any of those that we sort of think of as more unhealthy, then maybe we're going to have a conversation and kind of explore some healthier coping skills. You don't need to be a therapist to do that kind of stuff. And just a disclaimer here that every youth has different coping skills, and what may work for one will not work for another necessarily. And what works for us and what we think are good coping skills may not be at all. An example that I give of this is my son, and this is not his only coping skill, but one of his coping skills is playing Minecraft. And for a long time, I really, really, really pushed back on that. I didn't want screen time to be a coping skill for him. And it is not his only one. But there are times when that's what's going to help, and really just kind of letting a little bit of that go and kind of just acknowledging that everyone has different coping skills. All right. So as we're starting to get wrapped up here a little bit, I just wanted to give you one resource that, again, if I was with you in person, I would have copies of these to give out, but I'm happy to send them or drop them off if that's something that anyone is interested in. So these are a no-cost resource that Connors Climb offers to anyone in the community. And it's really just a tool to get us started on talking about mental health with the youth in our lives. So these can be I can get you some. They can also be printed from our website. One cool thing about printing them from our website is that you can type in the information and then it prints right out. I know like my own kid likes to do that. Like he thinks that's cool. Um, so, but how, people use them in many different ways. Some schools actually put them out like at family nights so that families can use them. I have some school counselors that use them. I have advisors at schools that use them. I have, in Stratford County, the Family Resource Center uses them. So you can use them in all different ways. The basic premise is, though, really it's just kind of a tool to get you talking. So talking about who the youth's trusted adults are, who their trusted peers are, and if they don't have people in either of those groups, kind of having a conversation about that, and do they want to have people in those groups? Kind of exploring that a little bit, and then really having a conversation about what are some things you would talk to your peers about, and then what are some things that you really should talk to an adult about, and kind of just putting some of those boundaries up, which I think is important. And then on the back, there's just a place for notes. You can use it for whatever you want. Typically, I use this for coping skills when I work with youth, kind of asking that question: when you're stressed, what do you do? Um, I think originally when this was designed, it was one of those things where, oh, we'll have the youth keep it with them and they can pull it out when they need it. I don't think that's realistic. However, writing it down is going to help, right? And if they write it down, they're more apt to remember, and they've actually talked about it. So, just a resource if you are all interested. And then just another resource if you're interested at any time. This is our Stick It to Stigma program. So this is our mental health awareness branch of our organization. So we offer again, free of charge. It's not a fundraiser. We offer mental health awareness events to really any organization that wants to partner with us. We like to partner with events that are non-mental health related, to kind of just normalize the conversation. So people go, usually youth-oriented events. People go, they see us talking about mental health. This started as games, so that's why it says games up there. So we do hockey games with UNH, we do lacrosse games at different high schools, and when we do the games, we have the players kind of do testimonials about their mental health, and it really helps just kind of break down that stigma and just kind of normalize. So if you or anyone is involved in an organization that might want to partner with us in that way, we would love to do that. Right. And then shameless plug is next. We are a nonprofit. So this is our biggest fundraiser of the year. This was last year's, but our next year's 5K is on the 22nd of September in 2024. And registration is open. So you can go to our website and register if you'd like. It's held in Exeter at the Seco School of Technology. So, all right. And then just kind of some action steps as we're kind of wrapping up. So just kind of noticing those warning signs in the youth that you're working with or the youth that are in your personal life, helping to build some coping skills, kind of just even having those conversations around coping skills, and then talking to youth about mental health and suicide, and really just having those conversations and starting the conversation early before it, and hopefully preventing it from becoming a crisis, because if you start talking about it, hopefully youth will be able to come and have those conversations more freely with you. All right, so I'll do questions in a second if we have any. I just want to bring it back to our founder, Tara. She is that woman in between the two hockey players there on the left. I just like to bring it back to her at the end. She is the reason I'm here, reason I do this work. She took definitely the worst thing that ever happened in her life and really made it into something beautiful. So she is inspiring to me for sure. And that is all I have. That's all my contact info. Feel free to reach out to me at any time. And I will stay on for as long as you need for questions. And then, yeah, thank you all so much. I am going to hopefully stop the recording. I'll stop the share first, and then hopefully I'll be able to stop the recording.